terms of like infrastructure, interpretation, education, and also just being able to connect with the folks that live around these parks are really important to us. And so when Teresa came, it was just such a great opportunity to be able to embark in this journey together, and I really appreciate and I'm grateful to be part of this film and also part of Save the Redwoods League. And I've now passed this over to Jose Gonzalez, which has been a pleasure that I finally got to work with you again. It's been about a year since we had since I've met you, and so it's been great to be in this journey with you. And welcome. Thank you.
All right. We're going to have a conversation with a couple of colleagues. Please, Michael, Alejandro, come on up. I'll just project since this is a good room, but if we need to use the mic, use the mic. All right. So, couple of things. First of all, welcome everybody. What I'm excited about is for the next 20 plus minutes is kind of have a really cool conversation, then open it up to Q&A. Part of it is that if you chose to be here, you're going to get a lot of really cool info. So, the graduate level education for these scholars. And then the other one.
It's really hot. I could tell the heat from this.
Yeah? Oh, yeah. Love it. And then the other thing is two pieces of disclosure. I'm also a counselor for Save the Redwoods League. What that means is I'm kind of part of the advisory semi-governance structure. So I was joking with Teresa that part of that is that Teresa reaches out, the league says let's talk, but then they immediately reach out to me to be like, help us work with Teresa. And I'm like, on it. But also just part of that to recognize that I wear that hat. And the other one as moderators, I'm gonna pose a few questions to our panelists. And really part of what I want to do is not have a quote unquote traditional equity, inclusion, diversity conversation. I want to show how that's part of the work that they do, not limited to that scope, because they're amazing, talented, creative artists, and that's what excites me about it. We have here, yes, photographers, filmmakers, but also runners, climbers, dancers, a whole kind of multifaceted crew. So I'm going to start by asking each of you the easy part, which is include at least two pieces. Share with everybody your name or how you like to be identified. And then two, what is one thing you do? And feel free to throw any social media handles or how you like people to engage with you online, if that makes sense. All right? And then we'll get into the questions. Start with you, Mike.
Hi everyone. Can everyone hear me all right? Is that good? Cool. My name is Michael Estrada. I identify by he, him pronouns, but I also respond to they. I am a photographer, a writer, like Jose mentioned, also an athlete in many different ways. And yeah, keep it short and simple for now. Cool.
Yes, hi, I'm Faith. Very excited to be here with this amazing crew of people. Also want to acknowledge we're on Nisenan land, and it's exciting to learn about the Nisenan people over here in Nevada City. I'm a filmmaker, a runner, a creative, and yeah, leave it at that.
Teresa Baker, I'm founder of the Outdoor CEO Diversity Pledge. I work on matters of diversity and inclusion, and it's really just an excuse to get outdoors and be carefree.
I'm Alejandro Lozano. I'm working Latino Outdoors in social media content. I'm a climber, I'm a forager, and dancer, and artist.
Sweet. All right. Thank you.
And you, Jose?
Oh, me, yeah. Okay. So my name. Jose Guadalupe Adonis Gonzalez Rosales. Also, he, him, his. I also respond to they, them, or anything offered with respect. And then lastly, in terms of kind of my social emotional greeting language, meaning like how do you want to say hi, I flex. So if you want to hug, high five, fist bump, just kind of like head nod from the corner. So I'm going to start with the first question, and there'll be I'll say something that I think we often say a lot, but it's really going to be on you to like help make it happen. Which is that I'm not going to throw a question and go one by one and then have you each answer it. I'll throw it at one of you, but anyone can jump in and feel free to ask questions of each other or expand from that as it goes. Right. And I'm going to start with this idea of creating, because the film starts off. The film is kind of helps set up the foundation of like when we talk about equity, inclusion, justice, and all this stuff, and what can it look like. Right? But you're all creatives as well. So my first question is, what does this work look like in the act of creation, of creativity, of being an artist? Not just like a speaker or like, let me go give a scholarly type of presentation, but in how you frame a shot, how you take a picture, how you make a film, how you even approach each other. I'm curious how that question lands with you. Let's start with Faith.
I think in thinking about that, what I think about from a filmmaking perspective is often, so I guess I've been working in documentaries for a while. My background's in representation, so I studied like representation media in undergrad, and went to journalism school studying documentary. And so my question when I go into stories is, whose story is being told, how is it being told, where, and by whom? And I'm very interested in, my theory is that the more kinds of people we see represented on screen, the more validated we feel and able to just be ourselves in all the ways we want to represent ourselves every day. And so historically that representation is very narrow, and one of my goals as an artist is to just widen the spectrum of who we get to see, because I think it lets us widen the spectrum of who we get to be, which is very exciting. So oftentimes for me, in terms of thinking about who is on the screen and what is the profile of them. So what do we include in how we talk about a person? And really that's a very collaborative process of how does that person want to show themselves, how do they want to be seen, where do they want to be seen? So in looking at a project and asking people, well, what do you do? What do you like to do? And then like kind of interviews and talking to people, we hear, actually really love golfing with my daughters. Great, that's where we'll do the interview there. Or when I first call them, oh, you're in the nail salon? All right, can we do that when we meet up? So or if they say, actually, what's really important to me is this place. I think part of it is it's a collaborative effort. It's not you deciding what a traditional documentary shot is, what a traditional interview is, or what should be seen in the background. It's a collaborative effort of how someone gets to represent themselves in a space. So from a film standpoint, really like just trying to figure out what you're including in a profile of a person is part of that process.
Awesome. Mike, you want to add anything?
Trying to remember the original question, but when I think of storytelling, I think ultimately at its core, it should be healing to the people in the story and to future generations after who witness that story. And it can be a sad story, it can be a happy story, but ultimately when you see a story and you see yourself in that story, then that's healing, right? It provides you a mirror that you're not alone. And I think with conversations such as these, it's super important because for a long time, since we're all interested in film, like who knows what a fisheye lens is? Cool, right? So it's like for a long time, media has been controlled by essentially mostly white folks. And let's say that mostly, for the sake of this, I don't know, analogy, metaphor, I'm not sure which one, it's all been shot with a fisheye lens. And everybody's like, cool, that's like a really cool shot, it's a fisheye lens. And then we shift over and then we're realizing, oh wait, there's other kinds of lenses that we can shoot this from. And I recently thought about this on the way up. I'm really proud of it. But I was like, great. I was like, it's like fisheye lens, but now we're realizing, okay, for a long time, all these other lenses have been erased. And they've always been there, but essentially we got really excited about this fisheye lens, and we're only pouring funding into this fisheye lens, and it was great, fisheye lens. But then we're like, all right, there's other lenses, there's other ways of seeing things, and because I think storytelling should be healing, I think when you have that wide variety of storytelling, it really allows for multiple people to see themselves and heal in that process. And I think for me, that's my main motivation when I see something. It's like, one, as a storyteller, as a photographer, as a writer, I always ask myself, like, even someone who isn't always represented in these spaces, like, should I be the one who's there? Like, and that's always something that I always try to approach things from. And even just asking those questions of, like, am I the right person to be there? Can there be someone else to be there? Am I the right lens for this? Because we always bring something. We always have a preference for different lenses that we're bringing to something, right? Yeah, and that's how I think I approach that.
Teresa, anything you would add, and then I'll have some focus questions.
I think I like what Mike is saying in terms of the lenses and perspective, because for me, when I moved to the US 6 years ago, I was doing a lot of outdoor activities out there, and then when I move out here, all of a sudden it's super complicated to reach to these places, and it's very expensive, and I go to these places and I don't see my people, and it's like, what changed? Why is this country doing the outdoors differently? And so it's a different perspective of, like, I'm in my hometown, and, like, we have nature all over, we don't think about it, we just go out there, and you don't need, there's no status, it's not a luxury, it's something for granted that you're in connection with. And all of a sudden out here, you need all these things to be out there. And so for me, that started my fire of, like, I'm gonna tell this story of these people that is out here doing things, not following that outdoor industry pattern of, like, you need this shoes and this jacket and this poles to go out there to the mountain. You can go in your chai class and you can go and burn in the sun. You don't need, like, you're out there. Because I think it's important to remember that we've been part of nature, and that's our mother, and we are so disconnected from nature nowadays that we see it as something away from us. And now I think that's something like we're doing with public lands of, like, come to see this place, check it out, like something that's like, wow, look at this tree, that's something like really away from us, but in reality we've been there. And so that's one way of, like, how my intention is with filmmaking. And the other one is also part of that, of how we used to do nature and how we used to be in those spaces in community, and remembering how nature is not a trendy place to go and take a selfie that we were here, but more a place to heal and to exist and to learn. And just by sitting next to a river, you will learn so much more than all the research that you could do on Google. And so for me, it's connecting those parts of going back to the native perspective and the indigenous perspective of community with nature, and also to show people of color that, hey, we're out here, like, you don't need all these things to be out here. So it's like those two things, just like sharing, like, hey, we're out here, there's people planning, there's people doing these things, there's people surfing, there's people foraging. So that's the info.
Anything you would add to this? Now I got a specific question for each of you. Mike, I'm going to start with you, because if you're not following him on Instagram, for example, or social media, read some of his writings. Like, one of the things that I see, at least that I really admire about you do, is you have this ideation. You create, you really, like, speaking of the fish lens, like, you take something and you're like, check all of this other stuff out. And then I got to sit with that and be like, you just, like, added a whole bunch of other scaffolding and structure to the narrative. So my question is, because sometimes I get frustrated. I'm like, I have all these ideas and creative, but I can only do this.
Yeah.
So where are you with that? Like, where is this coming from for you? Like, what? Or share some of those creations and ideas that you have, because when you set out with Brown Environmentalists, for example, you were putting out some really amazing, cool, revolutionary type of, like, what I call, like, narrative structure. Like, think about this differently.
Let me try to hone in on that. I think when I was younger, I had, like, this crazy imagination and kind of run wild with different things, and it was hard to reel me in. And the one thing that I learned reeled me in is when I was able to connect things to multiple things, and that really helped me frame the world that was around me. So for example, with different narratives or different structures, what's been really helpful for me, so before I started doing this full time, I was doing education, environmental education, and when I entered that position, my goal was to make the work relevant to my students as students of color. And so I thought about, like, how I was as a kid, and, like, thinking, like, it was really hard to get my attention because I was like, I don't see how this connects to other things. So when I approach work today, what makes things exciting for me is learning about how different fields will connect to one another and seeing how these systems of oppression or media, how it all intersects, and seeing how we can address one thing and why in this field, it's also informing these other fields, and it's also informing other people's work. So we might all be working in media, or we might all be working in environment, but environment underlines a ton of things. So like if I'm talking to my students, I'm talking about the environment, they might be interested in Star Wars or something, I don't know, something different, right? But it's like, cool, there's a lot of like futuristic aspects in that. How can I bring that into land use or ideas of indigenous future? So there's always something we can bring it back to. And that's what gets me really excited about in terms of just like looking, kind of getting from different knowledge, which whether it's like architecture or design or other things like that. And part of this term is this idea of imagination politics. And essentially we've been programmed to see things a certain way because essentially the main creators of our society have identified or have just been white male men, just hetero men. And when you think of, okay, like most of the things that we see around us were designed by white men, then it's like, okay, well, it's like the fisheye lens. We've only been imagining, and we've only been seeing in this one way. Like maybe this building could be designed completely differently, and we don't know because the main creators have been one way. So the idea is to like dismantle that default of how we see things, and all of these fields will essentially like inform one another. And I think like all of these things intersect, like beauty standards, you know, design, architecture, like all of these things intersect, which is really exciting. It's really exciting.
Live the future.
Yeah.
And then Faith, when we were running out in the Oregon mountains, one of the things I remember this conversation, right, about like similarly who gets to create what, not just the film, but really the story and the way to approach that, the difference that it would make. And then you had talked a little bit about was it Brown Girl Mafia? And how that it makes a difference who comes in with these lands and how to get away from some of the kind of this extractive narrative or storytelling, like all of this required you, for example, you making the movie. So my question is like what is your hope and concern around that? Do you see like we're getting better, not? Are you feeling isolated, part of a community to do this?
That's a good question. Yeah, so we're Jose came down and ran Oregon Mountain Desert Peaks National Monument in May for a film that we are screening here at the festival. It's a U.S. premiere called This Land. Our director is in the back there somewhere. Whit has it, and Mikey.
Tonight at 8.
Tonight at 8. March. Mikey was our behind-the-scenes stills photographer for the film, and so yeah, there's a few things I think. So I kind of moved from working in an office related to film. I used to work at the Discovery Channel, and now moving to Portland, Oregon, where there wasn't like a network, I kind of had to figure out how to do film differently. So now I'm kind of doing more outdoor filmmaking, which was a struggle. And I was a part of this group called Brown Girls Doc Mafia that started over the past 10 years, and it was just people like getting together at film festivals and seeing what people are working on, figuring out how to support each other's films, and it's grown into a bigger thing where it's everything from a job board to like a way of trying to find really women of color filmmakers. Sometimes when you're reaching out and looking for things that have certain skill sets, or just sharing information, right? Having a documentary community. In terms of this project, we really focused on having an all women or female identifying film team. So that was kind of one of the things I looked at when we were putting the team together, which is tricky, right? Because we're also sleeping in a van, our film team's mountain biking around with a drone on the back. Like these are like very specific skill sets, and traditionally people aren't thinking women are doing those things. And so just through word of mouth and Instagram and asking questions of many times my white male filmmaker friends, they're pointing me towards people. And I've seen, I have white male filmmaker friends I've seen them do posts like, yeah, I'd love to have some more women to work with on the film who can suggest people. So I do think we're getting better, and it is about recognizing privilege, where it's realizing that potentially the names that you've heard that have been suggested to you before are not the only names that are out there. You have to dig more to find people that maybe you're not finding them, not because they don't have that skill set or they not have that talent, but they haven't traditionally had the same amount of access to get their name out there the way that other people have been able to get their name out there. And I think it's a complicated process. I was in a big structured filmmaking thing with Story Shift earlier today, and they were talking about how we're kind of changing the narrative, not only in terms of what our relationships are with our subjects, but how it's happening behind the scenes. So I'd say it's very exciting, the process of getting to a place where right now it's clumsy. At some point, we'll have so many different folks to choose from that I won't have to be saying I need an all-female film team and working so hard to find that. I'll just be like, I want to call so-and-so and so-and-so and so-and-so and so-and-so. I might look down and be like, oh, an all-female film team. And that's just, but we're not there yet. So it feels clumsy sometimes trying to make it, be a certain thing. But I think we're doing a process of changing the lens.
Yeah, we're changing the
storytelling.
Yeah. Hashtag changing the lens.
I like that.
Beyond fishbowl. Or fish nets. Thank you. So you just mentioned one of the things so one of the ways that I look at justice-oriented work is a key question is, what power are you willing to give up? Right? And giving up means handing it over, transitioning, collaborating. Sometimes people hear the word give up, it's like, I'm losing something, as opposed to like, oh, this is the expansion. This is the way that we're going to move forward. Conversely, there's also what power are you willing to fight for and harm someone else to keep it? I think some people don't think about that. But I say that because if you want to walk away with something and say like, okay, you talk about equity, inclusion, or JEDI work, that's a key question to always ask yourself. And so it goes around this idea of power and privilege. You mentioned privilege and access. So Alejandro, my question for you is, I got a question for you. He knows. It won't involve fish. So Alejandro, when we first met, or we had a phone call, and you were really excited, you're like, I want to do this and this, this and this. And you also do film and photography. What would you say has helped you gain access to this space or to create? Because this is where you didn't start creating because you're in the space. You're already creating. And now people get to see more of that. So what has helped you be more visible, be more seen, and is there anything still getting in the way?
I was just having that conversation yesterday with a friend of like, there's a lot of people doing a lot of hard work and they don't get enough lens or they don't get enough attention or light as they should. But it all goes down to who you know and the connections that you have and like how can you get close to it. So for example, with Jose, like he introduced me to all this environment and to all these connections, and it's been so much easier and way more. It just feels like, okay, I'm not crazy. This is really hard, but people is out there. People is trying. Like I'm not gonna give up because there is people that it's just like, and we're as a community doing this together. And I think that's the main part of it, is helping each other, and that's where I see the potential of growth, because usually, again, goes back to how we do things in society as like very competitive. And I think the way we're doing it outdoors, it's been switching more into growing together and in community. So I think that's how I see it evolving and moving. And a challenge or something getting in the way, I think it's the same. It's like the same point that you mentioned of how much power are you willing to give or to share or to grow? How much strength do you have to really fight this battle? Because a lot of people in a lot of industry right now, business brands want to make that switch and want to make that turn. They see that there's this need and they want to do it, but they're not willing to work for it. They want someone else to work for it, and it goes back to the same pattern. So I think coming across with people in different brands or different projects and just having those conversations where like, yeah, I can help you, but from me, with my power, with my tools, and you can use so much, and then it goes back to that kind of like, but let's have a different conversation, let's be a team, let's work together, and we're both winning, we're both growing, so I think that's the challenge.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah.
I wanted to speak on that really quickly because it's like with this land, it would have been so much easier to make the film and fund the film if I had not gone with first-time directors, if I had not gone with, if I had changed the story in different ways. Like, I know so many well-known white male directors who I could have gotten the thing funded so quickly, and it took so long. And it is interesting too with the brands, right? It's, if you're pitching to brands or pitching to who knows, everyone is scared to go outside of their comfort zone. And if their comfort zone is someone that has a long list of accolades, it's a lot easier for them to go with that person, regardless of what that person looks like sometimes. And it's harder to change the lens. It is harder to do it differently and to convince someone, no, like, and I think it also has to do with once you get in there, right? Because it's like, you talked about Jose basically hooking you up. I always say the same thing, you know, but it's like, it's you get in there and then it's lifting as you climb, we say in Delta Sigma Theta, like you're bringing someone forward as you get in that space. And so for me, a lot of times it's like getting into a space means putting other people in front of the lens and being able to say, actually, you know, I think we need to pull this person into the project, they'd be incredible for it, and being conscious of that, which is not something that, if you come from extreme privilege, you don't have to think about life like that. You don't have to think about who you could potentially help out because they're not getting certain kinds of access. But what you said.
Yeah, thank you. And I would say it seems at times like, I don't want to say step one, but a more visible common step is like, here's an individual of color. Let's make a film about them and then put them right in front of the lens. But then you start thinking, well, what does it take to then have that person be behind the lens? And what does it take to be that person that's on the side helping with the fundraising, right? What does it look like to now have, and so to get, because that's still important to be seen in that way. But then there's a whole other system that if that's not changed, it doesn't move beyond that. And so that's my next question is for you, Teresa. Like, you're, in the best sense of the word, you don't care. You're like, we'll pick up the phone and say, we're going to do this.
Yeah.
So this film that you just saw was just an idea. There was no funding, there was nothing other than Teresa saying, I'm going to go ahead and reach out. Right? And then you saw that. Save the Redwoods League is it's a pretty, how many here are familiar with Save the Redwoods League? That's one of the, that's one of the organizations that's responsible for the establishment of our state park system. That's a 100-year-old organization. It has a lot of power and privilege in its history, right? They could have easily said, thank you, let's have a meeting, and then Teresa would have been like, well, screw you, and then I'm moving on, right? She doesn't actually say that. She said she didn't actually. But that was step one. And then you also saw some other names like Hoka, the shoe brand, right? So they themselves being able to say, we're willing to work with Teresa. You also saw KOA, right? And there's we're willing to work with Teresa. You also saw Visit California, right? Which is no small name in itself. So all of that came together, and part of this, because Teresa, you're bold. So what, do you have a message around that, which is just tell others do the same, or how, from your perspective, how do you make that happen?
Overnight, but.
Yeah.
For me, whenever I see a need, I go after it. I try to address it. I don't allow titles, companies, big names to stop me. They're not a hurdle for me. You're no better than me because of who you are. And that's the way I approach this work, because it's not about me. It's about the environment. And if we don't all start caring more about the environment, we will suffer. And right now, the people who are not engaged in the conversation, the people who are not engaged in the work, are people that look like us. And I'm fighting for that. And need to approach to ask that they work with me or that they help me, I will, because my pride is tossed to the side, because it ain't about me. And if all of you in this room care about the environment, you will care about a film like this that shows people of color in spaces that we don't often see. So my message to those of you in this room who are filmmakers, who are on staff, on boards of environmental agencies and companies, take a look at who you are. And if you don't see us represented, that's a problem. But the good news, we're here to help you do it. You don't have to do it alone. So titles and all of that matters not to me. The environment matters more to me than anything.
Thank you. We got 2 more questions and then we'll open up to Q&A. So the first one's an open question to whoever wants to answer it. And it is, I'll stick with the lens idea. You know, what lens are still not being used? Really, what stories do you see still missing, or you see the potential and you're like, if only we could get to here?
I think mine is going back to, we do tell, usually there's this filmmaker or this crew that has this vision of helping a community or helping a movement or an issue, and film that and going with them through the whole process and help them to tell the story, which is a great thing, right? But oftentimes it comes to my head and think, but who is actually, where are the indigenous people, where are the people of color as a crew telling their own story? And so I think that's the one thing that I want to keep seeing, of like, you know, at the end of the day, the person that talks, you know, is not a person of color and usually with a lot of privilege. And it's good that we're switching to seeing that need and telling those stories, but I think there's still a lot of space for improvement where, you know, we can also focus more on letting the indigenous people and giving them the tools to them tell their own stories.
Yeah, I think jumping on that quickly. Like I was at a conference for outdoor wildlife filmmakers in France recently, and there's a crew creating a film called Queens, and it's going to be all about matriarchal animal societies. And the woman, I can't remember who put the whole film team together. Like, she pitched the story, she has the chops and the connections to get the whole thing funded. It's a series, and then she staffed the entire thing with women. And anywhere along the way where she didn't have someone that had the qualification, she hired a male as a mentor and made sure that at least that person also had a woman who was their understudy in the process. And it goes to the question of like, how do we do these things? And I think the need that I see it is still similar, and it has to do with access and training and community organizations that are working in media and helping put cameras into people's hands and things like that, and then still having a story chops to get the story through. It's partially what brought me into environmental filmmaking, as I realized when I worked at Discovery, I got so many films that came from indigenous communities that were fighting to protect where they came from, but every time I saw them, I knew they would never go on TV. I just knew that either quality-wise, the actual like technical quality of the film based on the cameras that they had access to weren't TV quality. Language is a barrier, right? It's really hard to get most people to go for anything that's going to be television broadcast, at least that has subtitles. It's very hard. It's something that we're hearing a lot right now in the Oscars, that Parasite is nominated for both Best Picture and Best Foreign. Honeyland, which is playing here, is also nominated for Best Doc Feature and also Best Foreign Film, and people are saying just give them Best Picture, don't give them Best Foreign Film. But it's the language barrier of subtitles is a thing. So I think industry-wide we're still struggling with things like that, where people think from a programming standpoint of view, I can't get people to watch 53 minutes of subtitles. and so that film won't get programmed. So it's a shift, it's a systemic shift in mindset for someone, but people are afraid also because if they're the one that pushes it through and says, no, you have to do this, and then the ratings tank, it doesn't do well, so I think we have to show success on smaller platforms and things like digital magazines and things like that first as proof of concept to get it to those bigger places, or you find an incredible cheerleader in-house who's ready to change the game and change the narrative. So I think we're still looking to get people in who can be those cheerleaders. We're looking to create those connections for people, and we're still dealing with getting people used to the idea that certain filmmakers can do it. So it's always really exciting to see unknown filmmakers kind of breaking in to the kind of more the topics of the structure that we're used to.
There's definitely a lot of structure and relationship changes and building that need to happen, and I think sometimes people don't think about. They're just like, oh, well, anybody. It's like saying anyone can be a doctor, anyone can do this, without really thinking about that equity component, what it takes to get to that idea of equality that we keep talking about. Mike, anything with that?
I think really quickly speaking to the wealth barrier that it takes to get into filmmaking, and what Faith said and what Alejandro said about bringing folks in, or maybe the equipment's expensive. If people are like, oh, you want to do a video, and video is also sound, also the person holding all the sound stuff, taking care of that, it's the editing, it's the equipment that's going to take to run editing. If you're doing 4K, it's going to take a lot of computer power to do the 4K. Now there's 8K. And now people are going to start expecting that. There's a lot of wealth in it, and in that education too, to get those contacts. And it's really hard, and I'll speak for myself at least right now, my financial stability isn't stable because people aren't prioritizing this kind of work yet, in any way at all. And it's not a way of being like, oh, hire me, which hire me, but but also it's difficult to get into this field. I applied to Columbia's documentary journalism program. I got in. This was 2 years ago, and it would have cost me $115K to go. And I was like, do I have that? I don't have any I don't have any wealth in my family. It would have just been all on me. I was like, I don't have that risk to take, so I was like, let me do it my own way. But that's the reality, right? If I would have gone, I maybe would have had a list of contacts, and that's probably what that gives you. But that's the reality of if you want to be, if I want to have that title next to my name, then that's where I graduated from. Where, it's the same work. And the work isn't diminished if you don't go there, but it's going to be harder to go around and to have those contacts to build and the tools to do it. And I think that's really important to Nate of getting into this work.
Teresa? Well, my last question, then we'll open it up for about 2 or 3 questions for Q&A. Real quickly for all of you is, based on what you said, hire me, right? What is one way they can support you, or that you are looking for support? And I say this because then you get to share that, because sometimes people think oh, I want to help people of color, and you want to check in, as Alejandro said, don't give me that savior model. Are you listening to what I'm asking for, rather than presuming what you think I need? Right? So anything that you want to add in terms of a project, social media handle to tag you on, what do you want to give a shout out for?
Definitely going to shout out this land film. I hope you guys can see it while you're here. In terms of support, honestly, it's where can we bring film? Who should see it? What kinds of organizations can we partner with to get the film out there to as many people as possible who aren't in this room, who don't go to film festivals, who don't have money for a pass or a ticket. So I'd love suggestions about who we can partner with for where the film can go, and also what kind of stories are out there that we could possibly be a part of sharing, and who are the incredible creatives that we should be working with. I think for me, it's I want to meet new people to be in community with, and hopefully share this film and Teresa's film too, and see where they can go. Because I think what you said is so important, right? We are all breathing the same air, and we are all in the same struggle together to make sure that we have clean air, clean water, and access to green spaces. It is bigger than us, and when you're emboldened by something that big, it makes sense why you can be so bold. It's I don't have time to have these so bold, so I really appreciate that. But Yeah. I'm Faith EFD on Instagram. I'm much more responsive to that than my text messages, unfortunately. If you have ideas, I'd love to hear.
I'm Teresa Baker 11 on Instagram, and what I need is for all of you to be bold and call out your organizations and your agencies who aren't doing or who are not inclusive of underrepresented communities. And that's not just people of color. That's the LGBT community, folks who are abled differently. There's a whole slew of us out there that are doing this work and are trying to be recognized. And I ask that you all support that and make sure you take it back to your companies and look at them. Are they inclusive? And if not, mention my name to them.
Give a call. Got it?
Handle Don Aguacate, or Mr. Avocado in English. I think for me it's going back to tools and finances, where the struggle that I've seen with brands is, for example, they're like, oh yeah, we're gonna support you, let's collab, let's do this together, and then you're reaching out, there's this, yeah, show me the work, and then maybe we can. And so it goes back to, I do have the money that you need, but like show me the work and then I'll pay you, and I put my logo in your thing and we're done. And I think that's where it goes back to willing to give, how much do you really want to fight for that change? Because I want you as a partner, I want you to help me. Let's think about this project together, let's work together, so you can also learn from a different lens, from a different perspective. They're waiting for you to do that work for them instead of learning from a different perspective that they could learn from. And so I will see that struggle where like, but sit down with me, let's do this together. What are your ideas? Let me show you mine, and let's do this project together. So I think that's my
Actually co-create.
exactly. Yeah.
Thank you.
I think I would want to see just a greater access to contacts. So like if you have contacts and you see someone who's trying to do so, like share that and then follow up with your contact so they don't just like cold call, and then make sure that it happens. I think sometimes people are like, oh, you should reach out to this person. I reach out to them and it's like nothing. But I think if there's that collaboration of like, I'm going to give you this contact, I'm also going to follow up with them, and I'm going to make sure it happens and at least something comes off of it. I think that's something I would want to see. To like to Alejandro's point, like the co-creating part and really taking the time to see what that looks like with whoever you're trying to work with. I had another thing and it kind of just went out of my head. But yeah.
So we have time for, is there a question in the audience that you want to ask to someone specifically or at large? Go for it. Loud and proud, project.
Oh, you bet. So this is directed to some of the contents of the film. And first, kudos to Teresa for her directness in emails. I gotta try that. But anyway, the concept of ownership, community ownership of public lands is a good one. But I was just wondering how you see that occurring. Back in the day, there was cities of Oakland, City of Berkeley, they owned camps where there was wall tents and campground sing-alongs, and families would enjoy it, and there's nothing wrong with that, but what do you see in the future for places like this Redwood Preserve?
You want me to ask? I'll add to that real quickly in my hat with this, unless Leslie you want to add real quickly as well. I'll be quick in saying that the idea is public, you still have to understand that public lands or public ownership comes from one frame of perspective, kind of this individual Western European model about ownership that completely wrote over this communal quote unquote ownership, right? Like private property. So we're in that transition of what does it mean that legally we still need to have a name attached to something, while at least the access point, how is this open to us broad and great people. And so that is what the league is working through now. It's like, what does that look like now that can be different than if we had done it 20, 30, 50 years ago, which is like, we own it, we've made the management plan, we've made all decisions, and then let's turn it over to Park Service, or let's turn it over to somebody else. And you completely, neglected a whole opening up the decision-making process about what that to look like. It's also a way to say that I don't have the answer, because part of the answer is going to come through a different type of process.